Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of A Dash of Cyber. And with me, as usual, are some great fellas, I think. Well, most of the time. I mean, Alex, you know him.
Ooh.
Anyway, so we have Brad Rhodes, we've got Rod Lewis, Alexander Blanc, and as a special guest today, we have invited Dennis Underwood, CEO of Cyber Crucible and inventor of Ransomware Rewind. So he's going to come here and impart some of his expertise in threat hunting and on ransomware. So that is the topic today, is we are going to talk about ransomware. Of course, no one really probably wants to talk about that after the fact. So we're going to talk about it before the fact so that we can maybe give you some information and make sure that you don't end up as statistics after the fact. Maybe a statistic on what you're doing well, what you didn't do well. So anyway, so welcome, guys. Glad that you could show up today since it's your show. If you didn't, I mean, I'd be pretty angry, actually. But yeah. So anyway, so we decided to do some talking points today. And so some of them are basically, so the first one we were talking about is some of the new techniques. Let me just pull this up here so I'm not looking down. People thinking I'm playing on my phone. Okay, so new techniques that are being employed by the, I am still going to play on my phone anyway while you're talking, but let's not look like that. So the new techniques being employed by a threat actor. Oh, we're using nice words today. Okay, memory injection, controlling trusted applications, and even, I guess, process injection and memory injection. I guess we're kind of put those in parallel. So I'm thinking that, maybe do we want to lead off? So who wants to field this one? So kind of the new techniques that are being seen in the industry.
Don't all speak at once.
Yeah, how about Dennis?
Dennis here.
Yeah, we'll start Dennis. Dennis is like our guest today, so we should be polite and let Dennis talk first, and then we can riff on that.
This is like where I go grab your favorite beer, right? And then be like, oh, I'm the guest. I can do whatever I want.
It's 5 o'clock somewhere.
That's right. No, so I mean, some of the newest stuff. I mean, in terms of process injection and kind of hiding like a wolf in sheep's clothing for the attacks, it definitely has been a common thing for a while. It's been a challenge, right? Because you're trying to convince the client that their SharePoint.exe isn't really SharePoint.exe, or it is, but it's also doing other stuff too, So that's been a big challenge for a while, right? It's been using that as a way to try to trick the admins. It's kind of feel bad to be imagine us 20 years ago being like an MCSE, just getting started, and some guys telling you your domain controller service is actually the ransomware. Like guys caught crazy, So now here we are. I don't know if you guys have seen that in some of your stuff at all.
No, definitely. I'll jump in there. A few years back, when the real trend, I think, for that kind of technique, Dennis, started back with SAM ransomware and some of those other things. Yeah. And so you would see in that, and again, that was if you've never mucked with that one, that was a nasty piece of work. It was anti-malware, right? So it would kill whatever antivirus it would find. It was anti-forensic. So if you had a sample and you deaded it, you could actually say, oh my goodness, it would, and try to look at it with Procmon or Process Explorer, something like that, assist internals on Windows. It would kill that, right? Just hang it, right? It would check to see if it was actually on the internet. And it was kind of nefarious the way it did it. It would actually reach out to the Microsoft servers and say, hey, I'm and in fact, it was Windows Updater.exe that they had hollowed out and said, hey, I'm Windows Updater.exe. I'm checking for updates. What version of Windows am I? Right. And we saw all this in the packet traffic. But if it couldn't reach and touch the DNS to get to Microsoft servers, it would kill itself and self-delete.
Nice.
Right. And it was really, very well written piece of code, but it all kind of started there. And you've seen, as we've moved forward with, Ryuk and some of the other ones, man, this thing is those just tend to be the techniques because, again, they don't want to burn anything, right? They don't want to burn their code. They don't want to get caught. So they employ all of that stuff right out of the gate. And, sometimes they get lucky, sometimes they don't. But when they get lucky, they get money, like we just saw with $11 million paid by JBS Meat Company so that they could get back into operations. Right, that's more than twice as much as what the Colonial Pipeline paid. It's crazy. Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. But yeah, you definitely see that stuff out there, and it kind of tracks back to that sort of starting point.
Yeah, that's a lot. 11 million. That's almost as much as Alexandria makes in a year.
I know, really.
I mean, that's, so
Yeah.
that's no, that's crazy. Now, one thing that when we talk about like ransomware, we always like kind of talk about the modern ransomware and what's happening now. And I think Dennis and I have actually had chats about this in the past. Is that we also can't forget about what's actually happened in the past and actually legacy ransomware, because if everybody focuses on what you do today, even if it's behavioral based. I mean, that's why we talk about behavioral based versus signature based. Is that we have to also think about what people did in the past, because if we only focus on what's happening now, of course, threat actors are going to basically say, okay, everybody's looking at what we're doing today. Everybody has completely forgotten what we actually did 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and they're going to come back and get you. So it's actually not something where you can just look at, let's say, timeline, put a mark in the sand and look forward. You actually have to still consider what's in, because we still see even RCE exploits coming out that were actually from 10 years ago, because they're actually still effective today.
Yes.
Yeah, what do you think about that, Rod? I mean, in terms of looking in the past, in terms of keeping that up, and and how does that really play into something like behavioral based?
Well, that's how they evade the signature stuff, right? It's because you only have so much database to keep signatures. You flush out the old with the new, and then if I revisit with the old, then the signature database doesn't have it, right? So it's quite easy to evade that way, because, as I said, there's only so much footprint you can take up on an endpoint, right? But the thing that I was reading today was neat. Was I can't remember which variant it is, but they're deploying in a virtual box. So they're evading the endpoint detection by they download VirtualBox and they play in VirtualBox and they completely evade everything, which is pretty freaking neat. And it's expected to be kind of the next big thing, right? Deploying in their own virtual environment and evading everything. And so they're constantly evolving from using Teams, Teams communication or Skype communication or Zoom communication for their command and control. Like they are constantly evolving, and that's where we kind of the good guys have to stay on top.
Yeah, cool. Now maybe Alex, you can jump in on this. One thing that I've been noticing as a trend too is that the bad people actually like really good quality transports and encryption themselves. So they actually do their loaders and the way they unload things. They actually are they like using TLS 1.3. They want to use all these things because they want to stay ahead of the curve. They want to unpack from their so basically the thing that encrypts your system and wipes you out is also using industry military grade encryption to shield itself. So I mean, have you seen, and what do you any recommendations on what to do about that?
Yeah, well, it makes sense, because to evade the detection, I mean, it has to look like a standard encryption process. So if they do anything like this is uncommon, like the behavior analytics gonna catch that stuff right away. So that's part, that's the real hacking. When we speak about hackers, they do find the tools and exploit them in another way. So the fun fact is, like, it looks like a regular functionality, but they achieve the goal. So, and I would not be surprised that we are going to see more and more mimicking of the actual process of the systems, especially that the hyperconnectivity world we face is opening new gates, because previously it was local system, and anything that would go outside would be like unexpected. So, unusual network traffic is an indicator, and kind of too many connection. But nowadays, we are all connected 24/7 to everything. So hiding just the tiny bits that they need to speak with the command and control server in any path, this is very easy. And as you said, they do start with a nice inventory. And thing is, like, the inventory thing, it's a basic. Know where you are, know what you have. This is a good thing in security, but the threat actor, they do it even better and faster, because when they land somewhere, they need to know to assess, first of all, where they are, if they can reach the target, but if it's worth it. Because they're not going to pull $11 million of a small mom and pop shop. They're not going to make money. Sometimes they will just wipe that stuff. They don't even target it. And so it's extremely challenging. This is why we see more and more advanced detection process. And it's also a complex situation, because the attack surface is growing as well. And when we spoke about it last time. So a lot of evasion technique, and a lot of possibilities, and less resource to cover it all. So it's good that we have this discussion, because we're going to try to see how we can catch this. Because honestly, old-fashioned thing, I mean, the old attack path still work, but the old compensation measure no longer work. So what can we do? That's what we're going to speak about.
Yeah, cool. Now, one thing you say here, now it's almost like a cliche, but we always talk about the landscape and the attack surfaces are always increasing. But the reality is that they are always going to be increasing. We're never going to hear somebody say that the threat landscape is going to decrease. I mean, that's not possible. We're going to start using less devices. I don't see that happening anytime soon, where everybody's going to decide to throw their phones away and go live with the chipmunks. I mean,
No,
I think about it, but.
And the fun thing is that because I'm on a lot of incident response lately, and you know what I see in the field, an encrypted organization, they fall because of the basics also, like outdated firewall, like no patch, wide open port, RDP stuff. The thing that we repeat all the time.
Yeah.
Well, this is such an easy entry door that this is still exploited. This is why when we sell old is the new approach, because it still works. So we have two things: extremely advanced threat actor with very high capability and advanced capability, and the same old holes in the infrastructure.
Yeah,
so
basics,
we have two. Yeah.
Well,
we need to breach.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Not to say we exchanged notes the other day. We were talking about which one. Whoever just got ransomware, they didn't have MFA on the account. The VPN had no MFA, right? Like that's a no-brainer, right?
Yeah.
And so you get breached through not having the basics, not necessarily through the most sophisticated hacker.
Yeah, and so actually, you brought up effectiveness too, Alexander, which kind of leads us into a second point that we wanted to talk about today, which was ransomware effectiveness. Despite, because people are spending and they are paying for protection. I mean, it's not like a lot of the cases where they just didn't have anything. People are going in and they're spending, sometimes up to millions of dollars, depending on the size of the organization, to actually have what they consider or what they hope to be, kind of their protection suite of tools to protect them. Yet we still see them end up in the news. They're on the 5 o'clock news because they're now stuck. They lost everything because they're, the attackers are, of course, it's always an evasion game. It's always a cat and mouse. So let's evade. You make a change, we make a change. But they're turning off firewalls. They're avoiding the AV. They're coming up with different ways of getting around so they're not detected. So I think, that to me leads into kind of, let's talk about, behavior based, because I think that we always have to, we have to drop the signature based. I mean, I might necessarily say 100% drop, because maybe it's still good to have that as a backup plan, as a fail safe, that we want to check that too. But, I think that's where it gives really a lot of credence to the whole idea of behavior. Maybe Dennis, you can kind of chime into that, is, what you're seeing from your perspective, because you fight this battle every day, in terms of them getting around a protection, and what do you do? And I know I don't want you to obviously give up any internal secrets of what you're doing.
Let's post my source code here, and then yeah.
That's what I was hoping. I got $30 that somebody offered me if you would give it up. So
that's awesome. That's great. Yeah. So I mean, I think that's a challenge. Is like we just had an engagement yesterday where the AV vendor punched the hash for that particular ransomware variant, which had been, it was a variant from 3 years ago, back to what you were talking about, Brad. The way they got in was super easy, like Alexandre, you were saying, so they got in, did the attack, and they just did a quick little recompile, and all of a sudden it was a new hash, and it's a brand new piece of malware. The AV vendors, they added the hash to their database, and I was kind of, one of my guys was trying to talk to the victim and was like, well, that's great for the last attack, but what did that do for you now? And they quit singing their praises. That's not how it works, So behavior, we've had to, especially with the in-memory stuff and the process injection, there really isn't a file hanging around anymore called, noob hacker exe. That's not happening anymore, right? And so now we have to go behavior. So the real challenge is how fast can we identify the behavior, and then how fast and how accurately can we respond? Because of course the flip side of that is, okay, we're all going to do behavior, great, and think your SOC is busy now. Wait until you have 1,000,001, hits an hour, for every possible hackerish behavior, when really it's just there's a mix of legit user things, bad applications, good applications, and everything else. And it's like, well, we just made the problem worse by trying to make it better. It's almost like the old government thing where they try to come in and help, and then next thing you know, it's worse. And so it's a challenge, and it's been a challenge to we started saying menial into meaningful, because it's kind of like, do you want to sit for 24 hours a day and have menial activities of looking at ping sweeps, scrolling through the sim, or do you want to try have that, those 5 things that are really important?
Yeah. Now, one thing that we should also bring up, that when it comes to like false positives, because people have to tweak and their engines to make sure that we actually don't have a lot of false positives, because you could have downtime because of getting encryption, but you could have also downtime because you actually have false positives. And you posted recently, Dennis, where you were talking about that we could see up to engines kicking in with a with a 20% encryption rate, or up to 20% encryption rate before they even kick in and say, hey, I think something's actually amok going on here, and maybe I should get in and stop it. And then, of course, from there, if you stop it mid-file, let's say it's a 50 gig file that's being encrypted, and you kill that process, and halfway through, you've just completely destroyed that file that you're never going to get back. And of course, a good attacker, keep saying good, but what they do, have already completely ridded you of your backups. So you don't even have anything to get that data back. And typically, I think that they're smart enough today to know that usually the newer data is the more valuable data. So they go after that first. So, what do we do in terms of, I always say this often in my posts, is that, the best defense is making sure that this doesn't even start in the first place. This shouldn't be a cleanup operation or recovery operation. This should be, you didn't get in, thanks, but no thanks. So, what do we do about that in terms of, making sure that we don't actually inundate it with false positives, but we also don't have a 20% encrypted drive before the protection actually kicks in.
Well, some to add on that, right? So one of the things you see in a lot of networks, and I'm sure my compatriots here today would agree, is how many times have you walked in on an incident and you went, wow, this network is flat. Right. Some of the basics, right? When we talk about the basics, like we did in our first episode, right? Some of the basics of how to stop this stuff, right? If your network had some basic segmentation, if you didn't say, put all of the SCADA ICS systems on the same thing as your admin network, like when we look at like Colonial Pipeline, right? The ransomware, right, was after their admin network, right? But they were concerned, right, that it was either going to jump the fence or had jumped the fence, so they had to shut. They isolated and shut everything else down, right? Well, that says I'm not going to read anything into how their network is configured, but I have concerns. But I've done incident responses where I walk in the door and go, well, let's see here. The reason the ransomware went from 0 to entire infection of 4,000 endpoints in 10 minutes is because you had not segmented anything. Had they beyond the DMZ, right? Boop, everything was flat. Right? There was none of that. And if you had just segmented stuff, right, then it's easy to, literally pull the plug on the network, right, to isolate the other segments so you stop it in its tracks. And now you only have, like you said, Ron, that 20% problem versus 100% problem. But so many organizations, right, they put out the next Wi-Fi access point and they connect it up and they throw out some more users and they don't even think about that. They have their guests on the same Wi-Fi, right? They have their guest Wi-Fi and the same Wi-Fi access point as all their business traffic is, and you wonder why you can hop over you literally hop over that fence, right? And that's one of those things. It's like when you think about those basics approaches, like look at your networks, isolate your crown jewels off on one segment, right? Put your other stuff over here. Put for crying out loud, put the printers on another network segment, and all of those things, right? So that you don't make it easy for them. Yeah, they might still get in, but if you make it easy for them to just run right through your network, right, then you're just sunk. Doesn't matter how many backups or anything you got there, you're just done at that point.
It's funny. 2019, we started prepping all these like advanced capabilities, like these countermeasures, and then we sat and we were like, it's almost like the grand opening for a store, and then like nobody shows up on that day, and then like. We were like, okay, we're ready. And then we were like, it was just RDP passwords all day, and we were like, well, like, so we're still ready, but some of the things, like we're seeing like Active Directory traversal starting to be more a thing. But to your point, Brad, like, I'm like, when we start seeing like Active Directory traversal and some of these more advanced techniques that have been around for a while, when we see those actually start being used, then I'm like, okay, good. The good old flat network NetBIOS stuff from the 90s isn't working anymore, and that's how we're going to know, so we're waiting, and I don't want to say hoping, but when you build something, you want to see it in live, right? But like at the same time, yeah, patch your machines to at least last year. Like that would be cool. Like so.
Well, I mean, I'll give you a great example.
Have.
Yeah, it's like, go ahead, Ron.
No, I was going to say even better is know what you have, right? We talked about it in the last session. Is people don't even know what's on their network, right? And if you don't know what you have on your network, you can't patch it. So at the end of the day, if you're running a network and you're quote unquote a network administrator, but you don't know all the stuff on your network, you're not a network administrator, and you can't secure it, right?
Yeah. And what shows up too, which is important. It's not just because we know that nothing is a static playing field. Even in a network, somebody could come in, pull in their iPod, grab on the Wi-Fi, and it shows up. I mean, you should actually have some, the visibility into it. I know that was last show, but it's not just so much as, well, this is our network. This is the only thing that's actually on here, and this is never going to change. No, that's not going to work. I mean, you can make that work if in some instances, but most companies are not set up that way. They even actually encourage certain things where they provide Wi-Fis for staff to put on the devices that they bring in for their iPods and all these things. They're almost actually encouraging their own demise, so to speak. But, I mean, obviously you can do that more safely than just like Brad was saying on a flat network. And, you bring in your device that at home that, your toaster just infected because some reason you had to have that connected to the internet. And
I don't want my toast to burn. That's a terrible thing. Nobody wants their toast to burn.
Yeah. Now, go ahead.
I was going to say one of the things, just before I forget, right? Like with SamSam, right? It was really interesting because because it used a lot of commodity code reuse with the SamSam ransomware. What was really interesting in the environment where I got to tangle with SamSam, their antivirus wasn't auto updating, right? And so when I actually deaded a sample of it, I'd try to back it up to about the environment I was seeing. So when we actually detonated it on a machine, I had forgotten that I had and it was a really old box, and it had like an old version of Symantec on it, and it was just it killed it on the first go, and I went, oh, well, that's weird. So and it wasn't Symantec in the environment; it was another vendor, and so I took off Symantec, and the first time I ran it, Windows Defender killed it. Right. And it hadn't been updated in 6 months. So it tells you how out of date at the point that they were. Right. And so to Dennis's point, right, again, the basics, right, 80% of the time with the basics, patch your systems, segment your networks, right, do the good asset management, know your stuff, right, have your, teach your users not to click on stuff, right, would prevent so much of this, right, from the get-go, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
I want to add on that.
Oh, go ahead, Alex. We'll go to the next question.
We spoke about network segmentation, and people see that as an on-prem thing, but that's also cloud-based things, because one of the incident response that we do, we got flat networks in the cloud as well.
Yep.
And this is a reality, and it's even more easy over there to split the networks, but it has to be done properly, because I went on incident response where everything was VDI based, but the whole VDI infrastructure was cloud-based, and it was a flat network in the cloud, and they got a ransomware, same thing, everything went down. And the second point I did want to add about the efficiency of the ransomware that we see lately is that they no longer encrypt the whole file, because Ron was speaking about, the load of encrypted the 50 gig file. But this is no longer happening on the latest thing we see. It just encrypted like 5% of the head of the file. And then you go next. And it chunks. So it's like very low CPU and very low impact. It doesn't have to go to the full data, but it still render the file unusable. Because they don't care. The only goal is to have a lover on you. So these fast things, it's like, thousands, 100,000 of file in a few seconds, because this is just header wipe. So, and that's a new kind of ransomware that we see in memory, polymorphic stuff, but that's not new. We saw polymorphic viruses in 2000 already. So, but this is just like old combined techniques that achieve better performance. And the threat actor also do not have anything slowing down. They do not have regulation. They don't have checkbox to see. It's totally free, unlimited resource, well financed, thanks to the $11 million just financing the extra R&D and that, and so they can go quick and fast and bypass the whole thing. And it's also teamwork. So that's also a big challenge. So sorry, Ron, back to you.
Oh, no problem. So the next point that we wanted to talk about now, Rod, I'm going to let you lead this. This is because I don't know what the context is that you wanted to come from, but you said what they do before and after they trigger the malware. So are you doing that from the attacker perspective or from the attacked?
From the attacker perspective, and just chiming in to finish about Alexander, the cloud is not secure. We have so many clients that think they put their stuff in the cloud and some magical fairy secures it. They don't think about firewalls. They don't think about segmentation. They don't think about anything other than, well, it's Amazon or it's GCP or it's whatever. And you know what? Those guys know what they're doing. So we'll just put our stuff up there. So point number one, back to basics. You got to secure your own stuff, irrespective of whether it's in the cloud or on-prem. But yeah, I mean, the whole concept of that next question was letting people know that there's a dwell time, right? At the end of the day, these guys and girls, I mean, increasingly they're staying less and less because there's more money, so they kind of come in and go cha-ching. But for the guys and girls that are more sophisticated, they're spending more time in your network. They're there for 23 to 46 days, sometimes longer. They've had the time to surveil. They know where your backups are. They probably infected your backups. They deleted your backups. Like, they've done all of the above. There's a whole heap of stuff that happens, and then they trigger the malware. And so the whole point of that question was to get everybody to chime in on the fact that and I'm not saying I know everything. I mean, we got Dennis, who's the expert, but they do a whole heap of stuff, and then they trigger. So after the trigger, now you've got to go figure out what they did. And I was actually going to do a rant last week on Friday, and I forgot, was everybody talks about backups as a panacea, but if somebody's been in your network for 56 days, how can you trust your backups?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and not just that they're gone, is that they're actually containing something to keep persistence alive.
There could be a bomb sitting there. We don't know, right? Yeah. And so prevention is the ultimate cure, but I'll throw it over to the floor. That was the intent on that statement and that question.
No, yeah, even when they miss the backups, you have to play that game of having the victim, load up the backups now in some kind of like quote unquote safe like bubble, right? Where like, hey, the hacker's probably in here somewhere, you got to try to like find the files that are decrypted, and also don't click on any EXEs. Let's try to wipe the, you're trying to keep it safe enough, but because, what is, I think it's like a 2/3 chance of getting reinfected within a year, and for various reasons. And sometimes we'll see where, the hacker can be in there, but sometimes it's as simple as that like weaponized payload PDF that person needs. They clicked on again, they had to, it didn't get, it didn't hit any antiviruses because it wasn't, popular enough or whatever. And then the keys are generated new, and it's just like, a brand new attack as far as the attacker is concerned. So it's ransom part 2, and you're back at it again,
Well, and to add to that, if you're a bad guy, right, why would you not leave a parting gift behind, right? I mean, when that's the thing that always scares me about ransomware. It's like, especially you pay it and they go, okay, totally, here's your keys, totally trust us. We're the ransom guys. We got a help desk. You can call us. It's great. But I'm serious. I mean, so you when you really think about it, it's like you never know what they leave behind. And when you look at these businesses that aren't, we'll say in the quote unquote, cybersecurity industry vertical, right? Because there's cybersecurity in all the verticals, right? But when you're outside of that vertical, right, they don't say, okay, now that we paid the ransom, we should probably go hunting for whatever it is they left behind, because it's just like anything else. If you give a mouse a cookie, right, they're going to come back and ask for more cookies, right? So eventually, I'm with you, Dennis, eventually, right, there's probably something there that's going to allow them to, come back again, right? And now that they've been embarrassed this time, right, maybe they don't report it. Maybe they just pay the ransom under the table. It's a pretty darn scary situation.
Yeah.
We've seen...
I want to raise something just on that topic, because there is the part of the investigation and incident response, which is the forensic. And people, they don't get it because organizations want to be back on track as fast as possible. So 2 mistakes that we see. First of all, they do try to restore the backup over the existing system, and they wipe any proof and logs that we may find to trace the root cause. Because when we do a forensic investigation, we don't look after who was the threat actor. If we find it and we have some intelligence to share with the law enforcement, this is great. But we want to know how they did get in. As Brad said, if they came once, they're going to come twice. Restoring is not enough. So the root cause analysis that is allowed by the forensic is the way to know what was the entry door. Sometimes it's obvious, everything is outdated, everything is open, so it's just wide open, so that's easy. But if it's kind of a little bit more mature, you want to know how they came in, because before getting back online, you need to just bridge that gap. Otherwise, it's going to go for a second round, as some insurance company paid already twice, as we saw.
So I guess...
let's talk a bit about... I just want to ask a question. So just to talk a bit about, people downtime, is extremely expensive. I mean, people want to get up and running. They want to get their business back. They want to get going really quickly. And I'm sure, I mean, I have no stats to prove this, but, they probably don't go in there and fix the problem first. And now, do you see in the industry, now anybody can chime in on this, is that where the actual attackers are also going in and fixing the problem for the person they attack so that other people don't come in and actually cause a problem. So they're almost becoming their own security recovery and incident response team, going in there and solving the problem that actually let them get in the first place, to almost make that kind of relationship and, let's say, trust the criminals to help you out. Because I mean, I'm sure if I was actually a negotiator, I would actually make that part of the deal, that I don't need this happening again, whether it's you or somebody else. How do we stop you doing this again? And do they actually come in and make that kind of deal as part of their payment?
I will not trust any criminal at all.
No.
I mean, that's the old school, isn't it? Like the malware would actually run the patch that the exploit used, and that way that no one could follow them in. That's like, I think I first saw that in 2001.
Yeah, to trumpet what Dennis was saying, that was kind of the style, right? I found the way in. I don't want anybody else to be in here while I'm here. So I close the door and I do my nastiness and away I go. But yeah, to Alexander's point, I wouldn't trust these cats to do anything in your benefit.
No, they definitely don't have your benefit in mind, because they're going to go in there and put another hole that only they know about to come in after the fact. So I mean, that's the thing. You're negotiating with criminals, and if you're expecting a honest exchange, well, I don't know who the fool is really at that point. I mean, it's,
I thought you were speaking about some government or some stuff, but no, it's not that. There's no second backdoor in it or something.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, and one thing that I know, Dennis, you and I
next
talked about
episode,
this.
Alexandre.
But to bring that kind of full circle too. I mean, one thing that we've talked about, and Dennis and I've talked about this in the past too, is that ransomware, where we say, is like the beginning. It's like the end game. It's the beginning of the end game. Is that these people are there. They're setting up the seeds of your demise. Well before that malware starts encrypting. And in some cases, I think it all depends on the target. Like if it's a home user, they probably don't care. They probably get in and they probably have you encrypt it within minutes, because they know they don't have to worry about backups. They know you don't do that anyway at home. So it's just a quick win. But when it comes to a larger organization, they might be setting the seeds for that for up to 6-9 months, who knows? And from that point, the malware, the ransomware, is really just the final blow. They've been in there setting up, they've been collecting data. They've already got their extortion and double extortion already set up about, if you don't pay, we already know exactly who we can get money from your customer base, because we're going to go after them if you don't pay. They've already got that probably already in their sales queue. And, and we have to, it's sad to think about this, but they run these criminal organizations run it like a business. They've got a pipeline. They've got, they get everything in there. It's disgusting when you think about it, but it is the reality, right?
Well, and it's well organized, because the one that get in the network, that's the initial access, and those the lateral moves and expansion, is not the one that drop the actual ransom stuff. It's a multi-stage, and they resell the access to each other, so that you get botnet network, and it's not expensive to buy this. And then when you buy it, you do whatever you want. So that's right stuff. And what I saw on many incidents as well, was that there is a small delay between the exfiltration is over and the actual encryption stuff. It's just overlapping just a little bit, because they know, and as you say, they did recognize that they know what's the critical data. So they know when they pulled out the key data that's enough to be a lever, they will continue the exfiltration, but start the encryption before it's actually over, because it's really optimized. And there is a productivity question on the criminal side of things. It's so well organized that they don't have time to waste with you, because they move on and they work on the next target. Because there is a lot of work they do, because they identify your finance status, your ability to pay, who are the key person, the partners. And now we see the blackmail, they call it the second threat or something like that, the two-phase ransom, where they threaten to contact your partner and customer and drop the data. And sometimes they even try to get your double extortion, and they try to get your partner or customer to pay something as well, if you don't pay, or put pressure from them on you. So and one key thing that you can watch, and because I see SMBs, they do not have SIEM or logs. They don't have visibility, no track. So if they didn't overwrite everything, even they don't have the history. So the only way we get to see if something went out is we go to the ISP and we take the internet bandwidth stat, because the ISP keep that. And this is really a good indicator, because you take a year back, you have the average in and out, especially, with COVID, you just have to match what's the remote work and stuff. But if you have a spike of data, the volume is going to give you an idea about how much went out. And this is compared to the amount of data asset they have. This gives you a good idea, and you have to assume it's compressed. So depending on the type of file, you can quickly assess how much in percentage they got out. And that's a good thing if they don't have any logs.
I made a mistake with the client. Oh, go ahead, Rod. Sorry.
I was going to say, that's what I was going to say. That's why you see the closeness between the trigger of the encryption, because profiling, you can see the extraction, right? So that's why it's so close, because they know that's the chance they get caught is when they exfiltrate the data. So they trigger the encryption at the same time. Well, when they get to critical mass on the exfiltration, they trigger the encryption, because that's the time that they can easily get caught if you've got good systems and you're profiling properly.
Makes sense. And I made the mistake of once someone took some of the files, right? They didn't take everything. So it wasn't like, a petabyte of data. They took some of it. And then I made the mistake of asking the client, well, okay, this gigabyte from this server, like, let's go through, how much value is that to you? That just derailed the whole recovery, because of course that's like saying, how valuable is that file? And then they're just like, well, I don't know. It's pretty valuable, I think. And I'm like, well, can you put a number on it? And it derailed the entire recovery, because like now they were trying to get into this whole, like, let's build an actuarial table and try to figure out exactly what ransom to pay and stuff. And I was like, I did a bad thing trying to be a good engineer.
Yeah. So Dennis, you added a document into the stream. Do you want me to bring that up there, and you can maybe talk us through
sure.
Some of the items?
So the history was that when Ron, when you and the rest of the guys were asking, talking about this topic, right, of things that happened before the ransomware strikes, I had just gotten done decoding a bunch of PowerShell scripts from an attack where the attacker had automated all this. So this isn't like, boutique custom APT stuff. This is just, it's now commoditized. And so I thought it was, kind of cool to see the 12-step program, that worked out conveniently for society. In terms of things the attackers do. Now, this is after they get privileged access and after they've dropped the ransomware down, most likely. Not always, but after they've gotten all the access they need everywhere, then comes the next step of the things they do to prep for the ransomware to drop down, right? So, I mean, we can go through these together, or I can knock them out. I mean, what works for you, Ron?
Yeah. I mean, just kind of go through each one. If anybody has any ideas or any adds to each point, just jump in as you see fit.
So the first thing they do is they prepare the environment. They'll start shutting down databases for you, SharePoint servers, web servers, things like that, because there's a lot of things out there that if ransomware encrypts the file, it'll actually corrupt everything. You don't get anything back. So that's almost like I call it good guy attacker. Like they're the bad guy, but they're the good guy. So the next is they start shutting off all the security programs. They start searching through the registry and through process lists and things like that, installations, to shut everything down. I always say it's kind of like if the ransomware is like that crotchety old obvious safecracker, that they, the muscle comes in and gets rid of the security guards and the cameras before that really obvious safecracker comes in to rob the bank. So that's kind of how I usually describe it. They do remove local backups. That's all automated. They go through file caches and backups, things like that. Various a surprising number of ransomware tools, you use that actually, where they rely on that backup being there, which is a bit scary. That was like number 3, right? As soon as they got rid of the AV, they automatically moved over to the backups. They do the same thing with recovery points. And step 5 is interesting. It's a little bit duplicative. They go back. So every now and then you see these like deceptively simple tricks we see on LinkedIn, right? Where it's like, just disable this one little service feature inside of Windows and you're protected. That's okay, but the bad guys already thought of that, and so they'll actually like kind of circle back and go through and make sure, since it's automated, they'll make sure that it is done a different way now, and so they'll be like, okay, well, just in case the PowerShell method didn't work, I'm going to use like this other method, this C# method. Then I'm going to use this in-memory method. So you actually see like step 5 and I think 6. I guess I'm the one that has to scroll down, huh? Yeah. will.
You got the power.
There we go.
Yeah.
There we go. I was like, who's this clown who's not going down?
Yeah. I don't get paid
wanna,
enough to scroll.
Just I want to add on Dennis' step about the defeat of the backups. I mean, I saw manual takeover when they could not automatically defeat the backups. And in one organization, I was an incident response. They had this a NAS, and the NAS had the replication as well. So the NAS was a backup, and the backup was replicated. They actually encrypted the NAS that was the backup storage because it was a shared drive. And the other one was actually a mirroring. It was not shared on network. So they stole the credential and went on the NAS interface and wiped it from the NAS interface.
Oh, wow.
So it can be very advanced because that's the guarantee for them that the organization cannot recover. So they can go very far into wiping the backups. And just jumping in that, the backup they cannot wipe is the one that is offline, also called cold backup. It's not ideal, but this is a good way to step out of it.
But to add on to that, Alexander, is it's great to have backups, and you know the words I'm going to say here. If you never test your backups, right, you don't have a backup. Like I've seen organizations that have told me, "Hey, Brad, we totally have everything on tape," and I go, "Cool, tape's awesome, right? It can last a long time. Put it in a salt mine, you're good, right?" But I ask people, I'm like, "So you got it on tape? That's great. When was the last time you tried to recover from that?" And they go,
right.
And then it's quiet, and you're like, okay, like that you don't really have a backup. You're done if you don't know how to pull that off.
That was the biggest challenge. That was the biggest challenge I had when discussing our products, and then the backup. And then I bring up that was like 77% of backups fail, and they think I'm talking about the hackers. And I'm like, oh, no, that's just good old being, a sysadmin, like, and bringing out that, old Windows 95 backup you have, and expecting it to work in your new Active Directory environment, and that's just good old life,
And the thing that people forget is, and I think it was me and you, Dennis, talking about, is the logistics of it all, right? If you've got like 400 desktops and you've got to rebuild them all from scratch and then pull all the backups in and get it to Sally, Fred, and Wilma, and make sure that the files are what they wanted, and all, like, there's no fun in that.
Right. There's
Fred says, I can't find file X, and you go down the rabbit hole for Fred, and everybody else is waiting. Like, there's no fun in that. Prevention
I hate
the cure.
I hate whenever I'll like the backup admin will be in the room, if I'm doing like a broader security engagement, and then they start naming their backup strategy, and I'm just like 1 terabyte, no 7 petabytes, no 24 petabytes, and I'm like, I'm trying to do the math, and I'm like 500 and I'm just like, okay, at some point this admin's making promises. There's not enough silicon in the world, for enough devices to make this happen,
Or it's sitting on Amazon glacial storage, so it's going to take 4 weeks to get it, and like, come on.
Yeah. So I can keep. I mean,
keep going.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So they did it, disable logging. They prune the logs so that there's no evidence, which is always super fun, right? When you're like Alexandre is saying, he's in there and there's just no logs. They removed Defender, so they've disabled them. Then they go in there, remember their system or admin, they get the right credentials, and they'll the scripts actually just go ahead and remove them altogether. And then they start logging people off so that they can't interact. That's optional. I don't always see that. I don't know how much you guys see that. Do you see them logging off people a lot or not?
I think it depends. Usually, it depends, right? So with SamSam as an example, right? The threat actors were actually command and controlling that live, right? When they came in and took, because again, it was interesting because the SamSam ransomware was used as a commodity, right? And so once they had brute forced the 3389 RDP port, popped into the environment on the dev asset that was, connected to prod, which should have never happened, but it was, and took the domain, they created their own accounts on the domain controller and just started persisting and doing stuff, and launched everything.
Nice.
And so they didn't even have to log anybody off. They had everything from the beginning because they were able to pivot directly from that dev asset onto the domain controller in production. And so, it's definitely a good option. If you're a bad guy, you definitely want to log off users so they can't stop you, I think.
I thought
towards the end, because it can also be an alarm. Like
yeah.
That was they pull the plug.
Number 9 was kind of interesting. I thought we'd stop there and talk about that a little bit. So one thing I'm starting to see is that with XDR is a great ability to like kind of fuse that network analytics and the endpoint, right? And one thing I've seen is they're actually disabling 3389 and they're disabling 443 and things like that, and they're blocking the cloud analytics access for some of these tools. I'm not even sure of all the bad things it does to this environment. I just know that when I started seeing the kind of like these firewall rules, I was like, this is not good that they're blocking this access. But I'm not even 100% sure what all the implications of that is yet, because like, does that mean like that all the automated backup utilities shut down? I'm not quite sure. I do know that it basically locks out the admins. They know that much, right? But I was wondering what you guys thought about that from like an XDR perspective, and cloud analytic perspective, right?
Well, obviously they're trying to blind people, which is, again, not surprising, right? But the irony here with that technique is that most environments don't deny all outbound, with exception. It's wide open. So it's almost comical that they're going to block all that stuff, because it appears it's the straight intention to stop those analytics. What do you think, Alexander? Because I do find that somewhat funny, actually, because especially in so many environments where you have that just wide open outbound.
Yeah, it's same thing. SMBs, they don't have an admin, so they cannot afford handling, the deny by default, because they have no one to open when needed, and they have no idea it's already nice if they know what firewall they have. So what happened is the ISP put that thing there, or the first company, they had a contract to set up the whole thing, and it's set and forget, but they forget, either they don't tell them that they have to patch, or they didn't take the subscription or whatever goes with the service with it. And then, it's that. So I think to have least privilege enhanced from network standpoint as well, you need to be already very mature in your security day and security work to see that. Like most of SMBs, this is just full access. And even more, since everything moved to the cloud, this is just like everybody thought that the whole security moved to the cloud as well, and they kind of forgot the endpoint. And we even hear like Microsoft is saying like everything is cloud now, but you still need a endpoint. You have a client, and that client is an open door into your cloud stuff as well. So you'd better still need to secure your on-prem stuff, even if it's at home or if it's just the endpoint side of thing. It's a complete attack surface that you need to manage. So yes, I agree. It should have been denied by default, but how are you gonna stream that live right now if you filter every outgoing port? You can have like a guest streaming network. I mean, I had that in previous organization. We had like conference rooms, dedicated network, printer, dedicated network, real work sensitive data on isolated and restricted access. But that's far from common.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I guess what you're saying
dynamic ports too.
But what this does is for like centralized logging or centralized seams or whatever, right? If you're pumping it to Logstash or FileBeat or whatever, I block 443, I block 3306, I block all these ports. All of a sudden, this machine is no longer speaking to the mothership. I can do.
I didn't even think about centralized logging, man. Yeah,
that's exactly what this is. Because on our cyber threat side, so our product, when we ship logs from endpoints, we ship it through Logstash. We through FileBeat to Logstash. You start blocking 443. There's a bunch of ports you block. All of a sudden, this machine is now an isolated island.
Man.
Yep, and again, that's a pretty good. Like I said, I see that as a I'm going to say great technique, but if I was a pen tester, I'd want to blind the defenders, and that's an easy way. That's an easy kill. That's an easy way to do it.
Yeah, it's pretty nasty.
So then they finally uninstalled the security tools. Not every security tool allows you to uninstall it. But sometimes you need the right credentials. Like Alexandre, I think you were talking about they had the right domain or the backup admin kind of credentials. We see that with the server apps. So it's like they first start with like the I guess one round, and then we'll see them come back and they'll do it a second or third way, which is it's kind of strange to me, because that means they're attacking so many of these type of servers that they know good sysadmin, they know that, yeah, I shut down the service, but I gotta like maybe move that file over to make sure that it like, it really isn't corrupted. That maybe I removed the .lock or something, and then we do see for, every now and then a script that will, it's almost like they have to have prior knowledge where, they have to like we'll see like an IP address hard coded in for like mounting a share and stuff like that, where it's like they did the recon, they paid someone $5 to get, or copied from Stack Exchange, the net use command, to go ahead and mount that ransomware. Which honestly, it's crazy that what we're seeing is that if the ransomware is more advanced, it doesn't need to have a drive letter, for instance, for it to like find that share and encrypt it. So Samba, whatever, doesn't matter, right? But then like the weaker ransomware needs to have a little more PowerShell expertise to mount those drives for a drive letter for you. So it's like, I feel like there's like a team somewhere, like ransomware hackers, and one guy has like a really good like PowerShell guy, and then the other one has like a really good C++ developer. And, I'm just glad they're not all on the same team, because then we...
Yeah.
So anyway, and that's all the things that are happening. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny too, because and the fact is, step 13 is just like we talked about. It's like the ransomware is basically the end game. It's the beginning at the end. It's like it's the last step in the chain. People think that ransomware just shows up one day and it's run and there you go. It's basically, no, you're dealing with an adversary that really put some thought and effort into this. And of course, now when you have ransomware as a service, looking at something like DarkSide, this stuff is so well automated now too, is that, how much manual intervention, I'm assuming that ransomware as a service is just that. There's not really, I know they're providing the means for somebody to come through their actual botnet as well to make that possible, but there's got to be a lot of automation tools that they provide, because otherwise, why are you going to pay to be using that technology unless they do a lot of the heavy lifting for you, because that's what they're good at.
Can you imagine a pen test report going from the initial access person to the ransomware to saying, okay, you need to run this share as this user, which I have the creds for. You need to run this share. Here's where the backup is. You got to run this. That's just a level of coordination. I honestly, I wish we had with our clients better, Yeah.
So one of the questions, I know we're just so we don't go too much over the hour. So I think the last two, and I think we can fit this in, is, obviously prevention, we always say prevention is the best option, but I think we should always follow this up with why. Why should you prevent? Because I have heard this really blows my mind, but I've heard people say, we're not going to bother spending a lot of money on cybersecurity or on effort, because if something does happen, we'll just pay the ransom debt, or we'll deal with it when it comes. It's a reactive model that we'll deal with it then, where, I think, might have been Rod that you said this at one point, but I've heard this said a few times, is that, you're paying for cybersecurity at some point. You're either paying it for before, or you're going to be paying a lot more after. And, why is prevention your best option? Let's really kind of dig into that and say, why do we want to put the effort into preventing?
So I'll jump in first. One of the things we're starting to see over in Europe is that the insurance providers are not paying the ransoms anymore. So there's why number one, right? And you know how it works, right? Stuff starts somewhere. It eventually gets to to North America, and people are going to say, you know what? And in the United States, for example, there's case law for insurance providers, cyber insurance providers, to not pay if you're not doing the basics like patching, like user training, et cetera, right? When you get to like the root cause analysis, there's case law that supports them not paying. So I think eventually what's going to happen is it's going to get flipped, right? If you have if you drive a car, right, and you have 8 accidents in the span of a week, guess what? Your insurance rates are through the roof. Well, eventually the insurance provider does what? They drop you because it's not worth it to them, right? I think the same thing's going to happen, and you're going to be stuck paying the ransom with no recourse from an insurance perspective, that mitigating factor, and you're just going to have to bite the bullet and actually do cybersecurity.
Yeah, and then of course you're not doing all the basics and after the fact to make sure that you're actually protected for that actually coming back and having a reemergence of that same attack, especially if you're just working with the criminal organization, like they're actually your IR team, which is just ridiculous when you think about it.
I mean,
who do you use for your ransomware protection? I don't know, some dude that called up that actually ransomed.
I would love Rod one day to be like, I was outbid by the Russian mafia. You know, like, the prices were unbelievable.
And they've got a darn good help desk too.
The reality is, in one of two scenarios, right? You end up with 10 to 20% of your files are encrypted, or all your files are encrypted if you choose not to prevent. That's really it. Unless, and without giving a plug to Dennis, I mean, unless you've got 0-day abilities with your behavioral, you're going to end up with 10 to 20% of your files encrypted, right? And depending on the recovery point objective in your backup system, you have X amount of hours of data that you will never get back.
Yeah.
Or you've got desktops you got to rebuild. So pick your poison. Like, you're paying no matter what. You might as well pay up front less than pay and take the pain of like 2, 3, 6 days, 8 days of recovery and lost revenue and all of the above, right? That's it for me.
Yeah, and then of course they have to know what prevention to put into place, and I think that's where, and we don't have that as a point here, but I think that's a valid concern to say, and I think a lot of people out there are confused. I mean, this is a very complicated thing to be involved in. You know, I mean, we know people aren't even doing the basics. Now we're actually talking about actually having proper protection in to prevent something like wreck. I mean, it's like, this isn't something where you can just go down to the dollar store. And I mean, some of this, I think they are buying from the dollar store, but you know, you can't just go get it off the shelf without the knowledge to say, what do we need? You need somebody to come in there and say, and then you look at small businesses who really just have somebody who wears 16 hats, who kind of does security, who kind of does this, who kind of does network admin. And, you know, they actually have to rely on MSPs who are not MSSPs by default. So, you know, where do they go to say, you know, where do you start? I mean, where do you actually say, I mean, obviously, you know, Alexandre, this is kind of your field. You know, you're in this business where you actually can provide, recommend, and get people on the right track to actually know what software to get. So, you know, where do we point people to say, this is where you start to getting the proper prevention? And first of all, the auditing to know what you need as well.
Yeah. And also, you know, speaking about why you should do it before, there is one thing, like, the ransom, the decryptor might not work. Like, you know, there is no SLA, there is no warranty that thing you pay, you may not get the file back. That happened many times. Second thing is, when the data is out, it's too late. Even if you get your data back, it's out. So there is a lot of liability, legal issue, law is evolving. Another thing, in the US, some groups, you cannot pay them because they are categorized as terrorists. So if you pay them, you are actually guilty of doing something illegal. So that's not an option either. So I am, you know, on LinkedIn, a lot of discussion that side saying, yeah, but sometimes from a business standpoint, it makes sense to pay, you know, because, you know, employment is at stake. But, you know, criminal networks also finance way more than just IT issue. This is also human trafficking. This is also drug trafficking. And people say, there is no proof that this is linked. Well, why is the money out? Well, you know, what do they do with that? It's crime. So you don't finance crime. And then he said, you know, someone told me, yeah, but people are going to lose their job. Yeah, you know, you can rebuild a company, but financing these guys is going to kill 100 others company.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
and then he told me, yeah. And he said, oh, I love your ideal view of society and sacrifice for the others. This is not how it works. I understand, and this is why I'm a supporter of making it illegal to pay ransomware, because otherwise it's just going to expand. Yeah. And at some point, it's going to poison the economy to a point that we are going to do a good depression from an economical standpoint. So we need to stop it as a whole. And I don't remember what was your question, but this is what I wanted to say.
That wasn't the question, but no, it's really just you know, pointing people to the right place to say, you know, we're talking about we want people to prevent and actually have the fundamentals and basics. Now we're not here to talk about going in and say go read NIST and go to CIS and learn how to do these. That's another show. There's a bit of onus on them, but I think when it comes to getting the protection in place, like, I mean, I'm going to use Dennis as an example, you know, to say, you know, Ransomware Rewind. You know, if somebody wants to go get his product and put it in his place, first of all, they don't know about it necessarily. And where do you go to get that information to say, here's what's out there? And let's look at your environment. Let's look at your use cases, what you're doing, and recommend what you need. Because otherwise, people are left to their own devices to go search on Google and say, ransomware protection. Oh, whatever comes up first based on search
Never
results and
paid the
SEM
ad.
good marketing. What do you get? So we actually have to, I think it'd be important to say, where do you start? Where do you get the right protection you need? And that's going to be different for every organization, I think, based on what they do. So, where do you start for that?
Well, I'd like to think that some of us here can help with that. I mean, that's like, hit up me, hit up Alexander, hit up Rod, hit Dennis, hit Ron on LinkedIn, and we'll point you in the direction to find some stuff. I mean, that's why we're doing this, right? We're here to have these conversations, to be available. And, I know there's many of us here that are pretty big on LinkedIn and are happy to answer a question or two or provide some advice. And then honestly, the second piece of it, I would say, Ron, is you sometimes you got to pay for it, right? Yeah, there's something to be said for Google searching, right? But you know what? Find a consultant that you trust, right? That you can come in, look at your environment, and tell you and give you an honest assessment and tell you. And oh, by the way, here's the flip of that, right? As the receiver of that assessment, you have to have an open mind. You can't be closed-minded and go, oh my gosh, I can't do any of that. You need to be willing to listen. And you know what? That's hard. It's hard to look in the mirror and go, oh my gosh, my environment's full of holes. I'm about to get hosed, right? You've got to be willing to listen to that, because guess what? You're not alone. Every environment has holes that can be exploited right now. From the biggest company to the smallest company. And you just have to be willing to take that first step. And it's hard sometimes. It really is.
Yeah. And make it tangible.
You mentioned SMBs, and SMBs are chronically underserved. And maybe, we can talk about it offline, but maybe we can put together 20 points of kind of the basics that SMBs should do that can help, because the basics can help a lot. It's not going to serve everything, but it can help a lot, whether it's MFA or it's proper backups or it's proper segmentation or there's probably 15, 20 points that an SMB can do. But to Brad's point, find somebody that's a specialist and hire them. Doesn't have to be an MSP, but just if your IT guy or girl is completely oversubscribed and doesn't understand security, find somebody. But there's some core basics that everybody can do to protect themselves. And as without plugging Dennis, there's products like Dennis's that are relatively economical, not relative, that are economical that you can use. But at the end of the day, don't do nothing. Don't bury your head in the sand, because they come for everybody.
Yep. So I'm going to put you on the spot based on So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here, just because I like what Rod just said there. That says, maybe we can put something together to say, kind of here's a starting point. So, how about? Obviously, Rod, with your company and Dennis, and I don't know if Brad, if yours and Bars can get in, but why don't we just say, let's come up with a 20-point guide in collaboration. You guys throw that together and say, let's get that out there, and we'll share it. And it's basically in collaboration or in cooperation, and actually throw all, your guys' brands behind it and say, let's start here. I don't know if you're open to that, if I'll put you on the spot and say, let's do that. And, from, Cyber Crucible, from Brad, from all your companies, and say, let's do it. And nothing complex, just a starting point, just a starting little guide. So are you guys open to that? I'll put you right on the spot and say,
absolutely.
Okay. There you go.
I think the more of these automated things we can knock out on the attacker side, right, which is so wide open, it's automated. Once they have to do manual things, a scalability issue comes into play, right? Because now they have to manually go in there and do something. And for me, I'm like, okay, we're not going to get people to be Canadian government or U.S. government quality of security, although that's a whole separate discussion, right? But but the point is hey, let's start there. Let's there's an old term in the military, if the enemy is reacting to you, you're doing something right, and so if we can make them react to us and not just have scripts take care of all their wipe out our security, then I think that's a good place to be.
And what happens is the bad guys, they automate and they live off the land and they take advantage of whatever's in your environment to move around and do stuff and deliver the scripting like you showed, Dennis. But the key thing, and back to the to bring it back to the basics, right? If you do the basics, and again, I'll pull out an old military term, be a hard target. If you do the basics, you make yourself a hard target. And this is going to sound really crass and a little bit sad at the same time. If you're a hard target, and your next door business neighbor is not, guess who they're going after? Not you, right? Not you. And yeah, that's sad and it sucks, but it is what it is. And so be a hard target.
It's ROI. It all comes down to ROI, right? I mean,
It does,
they may go
yeah.
after the hard target. You know, I mean, if your next door neighbor is, you know, let's say a $1 million a year revenue, and and you're doing, let's say, $100 million a year, they may actually, you know, put the extra effort in. It all comes down to return on investment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Alexandre out to sell one of his helicopters, you know. So.
Yeah. His part-time one that he uses on weekends just to go to the playground.
I know.
But so anyway, so I think that's I think, you know, we've come through the point. So if there's any parting thoughts, so let's just cycle through. So I'll leave the guests for last. So how about Alexandre, if you want to go first? Any kind of parting words for everybody?
We will circle back.
Oh, that's a cop out. I got nothing to put over him either. I have that. That's. But anyway, so how about you, Rod? You're up. You're next on my. I'm going around clockwise here. But.
You know, I think it's like we said. It's like, you know, look at the basics, ask for help, right? You know, and be willing to listen when you know that there's issues you got to fix, and prioritize getting them fixed, right? Get the things fixed that are going to be the most bang for the buck out of the gate, so that you can actually start to secure yourself.
Awesome. Okay, Rod, you're up.
Yeah, basics. I key off something that Dennis said before he did the 12 steps, but if you don't know what you're protecting, whether it's your network or your data, so if, say you get ransomware and you don't know what's important to you, you can't really negotiate a ransom, right? So if you don't understand what data is important to you and how you're protecting that data, you have a problem, right? And that is one of the basics. What am I protecting? Whether it's devices, whether it's physical, whether it's people, whether it's network, whether it's data. You need to understand that.
Yeah, and know what your value is worth, because I mean, the sad thing is that the attackers and the criminals that come in actually do an audit on your system and actually know what your data they think is worth to you, and they set the ransom accordingly to make sure that. So you actually find out what your data is worth as you're writing the check to the criminals, right? Yeah. So let's don't be in the know. Don't let them tell you. And you know, again, it's about proactive, right? Being proactive, not reactive.
And protect it accordingly. Right.
Yeah. So Dennis, up to you, if you want to close this out.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, if you look for any of us on LinkedIn, really, you'll find stuff about ransomware, and if you you know, and security. So feel free to use our free time, you know, our free resources we're giving you, you know, to get that almost like free consulting, right? And then reach out when that's not enough, and you know, it's a good taste, you know, of the stuff we can offer. For us, you know, we built a great product for ransomware protection, and we decided the best thing we can do is educate everyone about how, you know, the nature of the problem, so that they just kind of walk right back to us. You know, if they answer those 7 questions of what makes a good product, they can walk right back and say, you know, this is a good product, you know, so that's the best kind of customer for us. So, you know, find me on LinkedIn, find Rod, find Ron and Alexandre and Brad, you know, and we're glad to help.
Okay, awesome. Well, anyway, thank you everybody for coming as usual, and thank you everybody for watching. And we will sit up for the next one. We don't have a topic yet, but we will get that set up, and you'll see the announcement, and we'll come up with something cool. And I appreciate everybody's time, and that's it.
We're out.
Thank you, Ron.
Thanks, Ron.